If a black woman forgotten, erased from the ranks, suddenly took flight to save soldiers left for dead, would you believe it? The order fell like a hammer. No air support. For Echo Team pinned in a burning valley, those 3 words meant one thing: no one was coming. The sky answered with nothing. Mortars crept closer. Boots dug into dust. Men who had trained for everything felt the one lesson no one teaches: how to die abandoned. And then, a sound no one expected. On the far edge of the base, a hangar door groaned open, rust falling like old snow. Inside, shadows stirred. A solitary figure stood with a helmet under her eyes, lit by a fire the world had tried to bury. They said she was finished, retired, forgotten. But tonight the Warthog would remember her name. Engines coughed, then rose a low, steady vow. The air trembled. A shark mouth painted long ago smiled into the dusk. When orders fail, when a chain of command condemns its own history, is often rewritten by the one person who refuses to stay erased. Give me 2 minutes, let me show you what one forgotten pilot can do. Why was she buried in silence, and why does she rise again tonight? By day, Naomi Carter looked like just another officer lost in the gray halls of bureaucracy. A clipboard in her hand, a desk stacked with flight manifests, her headset long silent. On paper, she was a logistics officer responsible for signatures and fuel counts, not for the skies. It was an insult dressed in uniform, a deliberate exile for someone who had once flown through storms of fire. There was a time when her name carried weight. Crews on the ground would whisper, "If Carter's overhead, we might just make it out." She had flown the Warthog where others refused to go, dragging men back from the jaws of death. But when the medals were pinned and the reports were written, her name was pushed lower and lower until it vanished. She knew why. Not because she had failed, but because she had dared. Years earlier, she had disobeyed a direct order. A convoy had been told the same verdict Echo Team now heard: no air support. Naomi refused. She rolled her hog down the runway without clearance and tore into the valley, her strafing runs, shredding enemy armor and saving dozens of lives. To the men on the ground, she was an angel. To the brass, she was a problem. Court-martialed for insubordination, her official record scrubbed clean of the lives she had saved. It remembered only that she had broken the chain of command. The whispers never stopped. She's reckless. She doesn't belong in the cockpit, she's just trying to prove herself. Some muttered it behind her back. Others spat it to her face. And more than once, she knew the words weren't only about orders. They were about who she was: a woman, and a black woman in a world that had never welcomed either. Naomi carried herself with quiet dignity, but inside the wound festered. Every time a young male pilot smirked when she entered a briefing, every time her name was left off a commendation, every time she was told to sit this one out, she felt the sting of erasure. Because this wasn't just her story. It was the story of every forgotten pioneer. The Tuskegee Airmen who proved their skill in skies thick with prejudice. The women Air Force service pilots who ferried bombers and trained crews in World War II, only to wait decades for recognition. They too were mocked, sidelined, written out of the official histories. But the truth has a way of surviving, carried not by generals, but by the voices of those they saved. Naomi drew strength from those legacies. She told herself she would endure, that she would wait quietly until retirement, collect her pension, and let the world forget her. She believed her days of flying into fire were gone, but she could never escape the reminder she carried in her breast pocket: a bent shard of metal, blackened by flames, scratched with the name of a young sergeant who hadn't made it home. She had saved dozens that night, but not him. The weight of that sliver of steel pressed into her hand whenever doubt crept in. Orders were written in ink, but lives were written in blood. Tonight, as she listened to the general's voice condemning another team with the same 3 words, something inside her snapped awake. Naomi Carter believed she would live forever in the shadows of erasure. Until tonight. The valley burned in Naomi's headset. From her quiet office, where papers and silence had been her prison, the static carried panic. Echo Team's voices cracked through the comms. Coordinates, shouted prayers swallowed, fear leaking through every word. And above them all, the general's verdict still rang. No air support. Her blood went cold. She had heard those words before. She remembered what followed: silence and men who never came home. Naomi pressed the headset tight, her eyes closed. The choice struck like a blade. If I fly, I lose everything. If I don't, they die. Her hand slipped into her breast pocket. The sliver of blackened metal was still there, scratched with the name of a sergeant who hadn't survived the last time those same words were spoken. She had saved dozens that day, but not him. His absence haunted every report, every sleepless night. The shard cut into her palm as if to remind her orders may be written in ink, but lives are written in blood. Logic screamed, "Stay seated. Keep your head down." She had already been punished once for disobedience. Another defiance would erase her career, her pension, her freedom. The court-martial would be swift and merciless. And then through the static, a boy's voice breaking, "Sir, they're not coming, are they, Naomi's?" Breath caught. She could see his face without knowing his name. Young, terrified, betrayed by those who were supposed to protect him. The same look she had seen years ago in another valley. Her pulse thundered. The voices of command told her to stay invisible. The voices of memory told her she had once been the only one who showed up. And now the loop closed tight around her heart. Could she do it again? Her gaze fell to the hanger keys on her desk, heavy as fate. They gleamed in the dim light like a challenge. Naomi Carter had lived for years in the shadows of erasure. Tonight she would have to choose whether to remain in that darkness or step back into the fire. Naomi's boots struck the concrete like a drumbeat of defiance. Each step carried her further from the safety of clipboards and checklists and closer to the place where she had once truly lived. The hangar loomed dark, forgotten, its doors rusted shut like a tomb. She gripped the handle, shoved. Metal screeched, dust fell in clouds. And there it was, the A-10 Thunderbolt II, the Warthog. Once it had been a beast of burden on the battlefield, built not for elegance, but for endurance. A tank with wings. Now it sat under a blanket of grime shark mouth paint, cracked tires sagging. A relic waiting for someone who still remembered its purpose. Naomi dropped her helmet on the wing and climbed the ladder. Each rung rang like a challenge. Sliding into the cockpit felt less like trespass, more like coming home. The seat cradled her muscle memory, guiding her hands as if no time had passed. Fuel pumps on. A low hum rippled through the hangar like a heartbeat waking. Oh, power check. Avionics blinked alive, green lights piercing the gloom. Hydraulics left and right. The old hog groaned, joints and pistons waking like bones cracking after long sleep. GAU-8 armament armed. A heavy click answered. The beast's heart, the 7-barrel Avenger cannon, was ready. Outside, 2 mechanics froze. Coffee cups slipped from their hands as light flared inside the hangar. "That jet's been dead for years," one whispered. "Not anymore," the other replied, eyes wide. Naomi tightened her straps and lowered the canopy. With a hiss, the world outside fell silent. Inside, it was only her, the hog, and the rising storm. The engines coughed once, twice, then roared. Twin turbo fans bellowed, blasting dust across the hangar, rattling tools and crates. The floor trembled under the weight of something the brass had long buried. Her hands moved with surgical precision. Gauges, switches, lights. One by one, systems came alive. Every panel glowed green except one. The reminder she had no clearance, no authorization, no support. She stared at it, then set her jaw. "Let them bury my career. They will not bury Echo Team tonight." Naomi eased the throttle. The hog lurched forward, tires shrieking against cracked pavement. The mechanics leapt aside as the forgotten jet clawed toward the open runway. For one suspended moment, the base was silent, just engines and disbelief. Then the nose lifted. Gravity shrugged away, and the Warthog soared into the red sky. The threshold was crossed. Naomi Carter was no longer erased, no longer bound to silence. She was a combat pilot again, and the storm had only just begun. The valley stretched below Naomi like a scar carved into the earth. Smoke rose in black columns lit by the orange flicker of mortars. Echo Team huddled against shattered walls, their voices sharp with panic over the comms. Every second felt like their last. Naomi tightened her grip on the stick. The hog answered, heavy but steady, its broad wings biting into the dusk. She shoved the throttles forward. The engine screamed as she dove the mountains, blurring past her canopy. On the ground, men looked up in disbelief. "Sir, is that?" one whispered. Chief Ramirez didn't answer. Soot streaked his face, his chest heaving. He could only stare as a silhouette with a shark's grin burst from the haze. Naomi lined up her run. Crosshairs swept across an enemy column, armored carriers grinding forward infantry, spilling over the ridge tracers, ripping the air. Her thumb flicked the master arm switch. The GAU-8 Avenger spun to life, 7 barrels each as thick as a man's arm whirred with a predator's growl. The valley braced. BRRRT. 30-millimeter shells, each heavier than a soda can, spewed at nearly 3,900 rounds per minute. They weren't just bullets. They were hammers swung by God himself. An APC vanished in a geyser of flame, its turret launched skyward. Another split in two, fire pouring from its seams. The earth itself convulsed under the torrent, a ridge collapsing into smoke and dust. Infantry who had charged with jeers, now scattered in panic, their voices drowned in chaos. Echo Team flattened themselves against the dirt. The hog roared barely 100 feet above them, so close they could see the shark-mouth grin, so close they felt the slap of compressed air. The line between salvation and danger blurred, yet not a single friendly was touched. Naomi pulled hard on the stick climbing. Tracers streaked past her canopy. Warning lights flickered, hits on the fuselage, small arms rattling against the hog's hide. But this was no fragile bird. The A-10 had been born for this. Its cockpit wrapped in a titanium bathtub of armor, thick enough to shrug off machine gun fire. Its controls built with manual reversion, so that even if hydraulics bled out, a pilot could still muscle it home with cables and willpower. Where sleeker jets would have shattered, the hog endured. Naomi steadied her breath. The hog shook, wounded but alive. She banked, hard-rolled, and dove again. The cannon thundered. BRRRT! Another line of armor disintegrated. A tree line erupted in fire, the canopy shredding as shells tore through trunks and men alike. She clipped the ridge so close the treetops scraped her belly, daring the earth itself to stop her. Down below, Echo Team lifted their heads in awe. Private Dawson, the youngest, choked on the words. "Sir, that's an A-10, isn't it? They said we'd never see one again." Ramirez pressed his earpiece, his voice trembling. "We hold. She's buying us minutes." Naomi heard them faintly through the storm of noise. A ghost erased from rosters, now the only shield between them and annihilation. She whispered to herself, steady but grim. But this is only the beginning. The hog climbed, smoke trailing from its wingtips. The cannon glowed, red barrels hot enough to shimmer. Naomi's jaw tightened. She knew the truth. The enemy would adapt. Their fire would grow heavier. This valley was not finished with her yet. But for now, Echo Team had the most precious gift a soldier could ever receive, another minute to live. Naomi pulled the hog into a wide banking turn, eyes flicking between the valley and her gauges. The needles were sinking fast, fuel lower than safe, ammo bleeding out with every burst. She needed a lifeline, and she needed it now. That lifeline waited miles away on a forgotten service road the Air Force had written off as useless. But to one man and his crew, it had become something else entirely. Sergeant Ward wasn't the kind of soldier who got his name printed in reports. He wasn't polished. He wasn't political. His uniform bore more oil stains than ribbons. But he was a mechanic who believed every jet was a life waiting to be saved, and every pilot family. When Naomi's hog had rumbled awake, Ward hadn't hesitated. He was already moving. He rallied his crew, 4 men and women who lived on wrenches, grease, and grit. Together they dragged trucks into position, headlights aimed down cracked asphalt to carve out an improvised runway. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't safe, but it was enough. Naomi's voice crackled through Ward's headset, sharp with strain. "Ward, I'm coming in hot. Fuel fumes, minimal ammo." Ward's reply was steady, almost calm. "Copy, Hog. We'll do it, Hot Pit. Engines stay on. You'll be back up in minutes." Hot Pit refueling was madness. Fueling with turbines still howling meant standing inches from intakes that could swallow a man, whole hoses vibrating with pressure heat so fierce it blistered skin. But it saved minutes. And sometimes minutes were the difference between alive and gone. The hog dropped in like a wounded beast's tires, shrieking against broken pavement sparks, leaping into the dark. Naomi fought, the stick held steady, and then Ward's crew was on her hoses, locking into place, belts of 30mm slamming into the Avenger rocket pods, reloaded by hands that moved faster than thought. But not everyone wanted her airborne. Military police trucks screeched up floodlights blazing white. An officer barked through a bullhorn. Stand down, that aircraft is unauthorized. Cease operations immediately. Ward didn't flinch. He kept waving his crew forward, sweat streaking his face. The MP's voice cracked louder. This is a direct order. Stop now or we open fire on that fuel truck. For a moment the crew faltered. One froze mid-motion, a belt of shells heavy in his hands. Ward spun his voice like steel. Ignore them. You keep feeding her. We lose this hog. We lose those men in the valley. You want that on your conscience. The hesitation broke. The crew snapped back to work. The MP's advanced weapons raised. Sergeant, you'll answer for this. Ward locked eyes with them. Maybe, but not tonight. Tonight she flies. The last fuel hose clanged free. Ward slammed a fist against the fuselage. Naomi nodded once from the cockpit. She shoved the throttles. The hog shuddered turbines, howling dust blasting. The MPs swung trucks across the path, headlights blinding. Ward stepped into their beams arms, wide daring steel and politics alike, to stop him. Engines roared. The hog barreled forward, momentum unstoppable. At the last instant, one soldier yanked the MP truck aside, unwilling to be crushed beneath the beast. Tires screamed. Sparks rained. The warthog clawed back into the sky. Ward lowered his arms, chest heaving, as shouts rose behind him. He knew there would be consequences, investigations may be worse. But none of that mattered. Above them, the forgotten pilot was airborne again. And the second climax was complete. The enemy was learning. From the valley floor, Naomi spotted new shapes grinding forward, long, boxy silhouettes mounted on heavy trucks. Her RWR radar warning receiver lit up like Christmas shrill tones, stabbing her ears. These weren't the shoulder-fired rockets she had danced away from earlier. These were radar-guided SAMs, the kind designed to erase aircraft exactly like hers. Infrared missiles, the kind fired from a man's shoulder, are hunters of heat. A pilot can fool them with flares. Magnesium burst hotter than any exhaust. Naomi had fired dozens that night, dazzling the sky with false suns. But radar-guided missiles are different. They don't chase heat. They chase echoes. They see the jet itself, the radar waves, bouncing off metal. No decoys, no easy tricks. And now Naomi's hog was painted bright red in their sights. A lock tone shrieked in her headset. Then a missile roared to life, a white spear ripping across the sky, its trail carving a scar into the night. Naomi's hands clenched the stick. She knew she couldn't outrun it. The A-10 was built tough, not fast. No hog had ever beaten a radar SAM on speed alone. Her voice dropped into a whisper, steady low. Stay calm. Think. There was one maneuver. Dangerous. Brutal on the airframe. But maybe enough. Pilots called it the throttle chop. Kill your speed so fast the missile overshoots, then punch the engines before gravity drags you into the dirt. Most jets are too fragile to risk it, but the hog is not most jets. Naomi yanked the throttles back. The turbines coughed. The hog shuddered, its nose sagging as lift collapsed. For a heartbeat, she floated weightless, the horizon rolling. The missile dove to match, the seeker locked, screaming downward. Naomi jammed the throttles forward. The turbines roared, belching fire. The hog clawed back upward, stubborn as stone. The missile overcorrected, too steep, too fast. It exploded behind her tail. The cockpit rattled like a drum under fists of iron. Shrapnel tore into her fuselage, alarms shrieked, red lights strobed. Naomi grit her teeth. She was hit but alive. Black smoke streamed from her right wing, twisting like a wounded banner across the stars. On the ground, Echo Team heard the thunder and froze. Dawson's voice cracked through the static. She's down, isn't she? Tell me she's not down. Ramirez scanned the sky, heart hammering. Then out of the smoke, her silhouette cut through, battered but flying. He exhaled, voice low. She's still with us. Naomi forced her grip steady. The hog wobbled, hydraulics, groaning controls, heavy as stone. Every movement felt slower, heavier, but she pressed on. Her targeting pod flickered, then cleared. She saw them, 3 more launchers crawling onto the ridgeline radar beams, sweeping like predators tasting the air. If she didn't stop them now, the next missile wouldn't miss. She banked hard, lining the ridge in her sights. The cannon spun, spitting savage bursts. One launcher erupted, another vanished in smoke. But the third survived, its crew scrambling, desperate. A missile streaked skyward faster than thought. Naomi jerked the stick dove hard. The missile shrieked past, detonating so close it shook the Hog like a giant's hand. Sparks danced across her canopy. Shrapnel pinged against the titanium bathtub of her cockpit. The Hog coughed smoke again. Systems flickered, fuel bled, hydraulics groaned. But Naomi steadied her voice, speaking into the emergency frequency. "Echo Team, I'm still here." Her words cut through the valley like a lifeline. The men below pressed tighter to the dirt courage stitched into their bones by the sound of her resolve. Up in the cockpit, Naomi's eyes narrowed. Her Hog was crippled, bleeding, limping on sheer willpower. But she wasn't finished. She whispered into the mask almost a vow. "Can a crippled warthog really fight an entire armored division?" The Hog limped through a sky thick with smoke each motion, heavy each sound, an alarm screaming its own countdown. Naomi glanced at her gauges and felt her stomach twist. Fuel under 20%. Ammo flashing a cruel truth, 120 rounds. Barely 2 bursts left in the cannon that had turned an entire valley upside down. On the ground, Echo Team was at the edge of collapse. Ramirez and his men had fallen back into the husk of a farmhouse. Walls, shredded roof, caved windows, gaping like wounds. Mortar rounds stomped closer, shaking the ground, spraying dirt and stone. Through the haze, enemy squads crept from 3 sides, rifles catching the last light of fire. Voices raised in cruel triumph. Private Dawson crouched, rifle shaking in his grip. His voice cracked. "Sir, I think this is it." Ramirez clenched his jaw. He didn't answer. He couldn't. He knew the truth. Without a miracle, Echo Team had minutes left before the farmhouse became their grave. High above, Naomi tightened her grip on the stick. Sweat stung her eyes beneath the helmet. Her muscles ached, every nerve screaming for rest, for surrender. She looked again at her ammo counter, the blinking number, like a clock ticking down her fate. One last time, she whispered. This wasn't about orders broken or ranks lost, or the career that had already been stripped from her. It was about the vow etched into the bent shard of metal in her pocket, the fragment of a convoy wreckage, a name scratched on its surface. A life she had not saved, a debt she could never erase. If she could fly, if she could fight, she would not let men die abandoned. Not again. The Hog rattled, groaning like a wounded beast, its right wing trailing black smoke across the sky. Naomi steadied her breath, steadying her hands on the stick. She knew what this meant. Her final rounds. Her final strength. And maybe the Hog's final flight. When those shells were gone, there would be nothing left between her and the ground. Down below, Ramirez pressed his earpiece, voice raw and breaking. "Warthog, if you're still out there, we need you now." Naomi shut her eyes for half a second. Faces flashed before her, the pilots erased from the record. Comrades silenced by bureaucracy, the men she had saved, the ones she hadn't. Their voices echoed in her memory, carrying her forward, whispering the same vow she had whispered years ago. Bring them home. Her eyes snapped open, steel gray and unyielding. The last of her fuel, the last of her ammo, the last of her strength. Naomi Carter shoved the throttles forward. The battered Hog screamed in protest, but it turned nose down, wings, trembling smoke trailing back toward the valley of fire. Naomi leveled the nose, the Hog groaning, as if it knew this was the last dance. The valley stretched beneath her like a wound still bleeding. Enemy infantry poured through the smoke-armored carriers, grinding forward mortars, walking steadily toward the farmhouse where Echo Team clung to rubble and courage. Her ammo counter blinked cruelly, 120 rounds. 2 clean bursts, maybe 3 if she feathered the trigger like a prayer. Danger close, she whispered, not a warning, but a vow. Close enough to save them, close enough to miss nothing. The ridge loomed black against a bruised sky. Tracers streaked across her canopy like burning threads. She ignored them, riding the tremor in the stick, feeling the Hog's weight in purpose like an old friend's hand. Master arm hot, pipper steady, breath held. The GAU-8 spun up 7 barrels, harmonizing into a single brutal note. BRRRT. 30mm slugs tore through steel and flesh with biblical finality. An APC erupted in a fountain of fire, its turret flung skyward like a toy. Another split open, belching flame. The very earth seemed to rise against the enemy as tungsten rounds kicked it into splinters. The front edge of the assault disintegrated. Naomi yanked the Hog out of the dive, skimming the treetops frame, groaning under the strain. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Echo Team's chance was ahead, not behind. She rolled left shallow but sharp. The hog shivered. Hydraulics answered a beat late. "Stay with me," she growled, coaxing the stick. A warning tone flicked on then off, like a faltering heartbeat. She forced the nose back down. Second pass. She chose the wedge of infantry, sprinting to choke the farmhouse from the east. She had no rounds to waste, no seconds. Just one last chance to turn panic into retreat. She exhaled and tapped the trigger. BRRRT! The wedge collapsed. Men dove into earth that exploded beneath them. Dust and smoke swallowed their screams. The survivors staggered, discipline shattered, courage dissolved. What had been an advance crumbled into chaos. In the farmhouse, Dawson lifted his head wide-eyed. She hit them. She hit them. Ramirez didn't waste the moment. "Move, she bought the window, use it." His men surged forward, terror traded for muscle, reclaiming ground one step at a time. Naomi pulled up again, the cannon's heat shimmering at the corner of her vision. 90 rounds left. Once that number would have been comfort. Tonight it was emptiness. Her thumb hovered over a button that had nothing behind it. The hog trembled, the right wing dragging half a degree too low, then catching. Smoke trailed thicker now, black ribbons against the dusk. Below, the enemy's will cracked. Radios crackled, frantic retreat orders. Vehicles rammed each other in their rush to escape. One tank tried to elevate its gun skyward, but Naomi was past it before it cleared the tree line. They hadn't lost their weapons, only their courage. Then the night shifted. A hammer blow slammed beneath her right wing. The hog lurched sideways, pitched down violently. Hydraulics bled out in a single gasp. The stick turned to stone. Warning tones layered into a wall of sound. Naomi's muscles screamed as she hauled back, forcing the hog into manual reversion. Cable's brute strength and willpower. The jet answered like a stubborn mule, slow but loyal. She gritted her teeth. "You and me," she whispered. "You and me to the end." Back at HQ, the general stared at the radar feed, face drained of color. The blot that shouldn't exist had redrawn his battlefield. A colonel spoke quietly. "With respect, sir." "She just saved them." The general slammed his palm against the table. "Get her down. She's finished. I'll see her in cuffs before sunrise." But beneath his fury was something more dangerous, the fear of being proven small. Naomi didn't hear him. She had only the hog, the wind, and the fading adrenaline that kept her steady. She keyed the emergency channel. "Echo, you're clear to reposition." "I'm still with you." Ramirez's reply was fierce copy warthog. "We're alive because you are. We'll make it count." Another shudder, another dip of the wing. Naomi eased power, coaxed every bolt, every tendon of her machine. The valley dimmed from fire to embers. Movement shifted from advance to retreat. She circled not as a predator, but as a guardian, battered and nearly broken, refusing to leave until the ground stopped trembling. A final mortar round struck with tired fury. No follow-up came. Silence fell, the heavy, unbelievable silence of men who realized they were alive. Naomi angled the hog toward the thin ribbon of road Ward had dared to call a runway. Her cockpit smelled of hot metal and the sickly sweetness of leaking fluid. A pilot's nose knows that sweetness means death waiting. Her radio crackled, "Unauthorized hog." "Advised status." Naomi almost laughed. "Unauthorized," as if life required permission. "Low fuel. Systems compromised. Returning to forward strip." She didn't add, "because I wouldn't land at your base if I could." Behind her, men touched each other's shoulders to make sure flesh was real. Dawson looked up, voice breaking. "She's still up there," Ramirez whispered, softer than any order warthog. "Thank you." In HQ, the general felt the truth slip beyond his grasp. His order would be remembered, but not the way he needed. Naomi heard none of it. She heard only the hog's wounded hum, and her own pulse slowing as she turned toward home. The valley now belonged to the living. The hog, limping loyal, kept its broken wing in the sky a little longer. Long enough to be sure, long enough to face the final trial of the night. But could a crippled beast truly make it home? Or would Naomi's last gift be her final flight? The hog bled smoke across the night sky, limping like a wounded beast that refused to collapse. Naomi's hands ached on the stick, every motion heavier, every gauge glowing red in angry defiance. The right wing dragged, hydraulics moaned, and the fuel needle trembled on the edge of empty. She trimmed hard, coaxing the battered frame toward her only hope, the forward arming and refuel point. A broken service road the Air Force had dismissed, but Sergeant Ward had claimed it as salvation. Her radio crackled. Ward's voice steady as stone. "Hog, this is Spur Kilo. We've got you. Follow the lights." And then she saw them. Not runway lights, not beacons, but trucks lined bumper to bumper, headlights blazing into the dark. Jeeps, lanterns, even handheld lamps lifted high by trembling arms. A crooked corridor of light carved through the night, held by men and women who dared to become human runway markers. Naomi's throat tightened. They were risking everything. If she came in short, they'd die first. If she veered wide, headlights would turn to gravestones. Yet none of them moved. They stood their ground for her, just as she had held the sky for Echo Team. "Gear down," she whispered. The Hog groaned in reply. The left leg clunked into place. The nose gear stuttered, then caught. The right leg, nothing. A red warning light glared. Naomi cursed, then steadied herself. She would land with what she had. The Hog dropped lower engines, howling like an animal begging for mercy. 50 feet. Naomi flared the nose gently. The left wheel slammed asphalt, sparks bursting like fireworks. The nose gear screeched down neck steel against steel, sparks fountaining into the night. The crippled right wing dipped, scraping so close that Ward's crew shielded their faces with their arms. The Hog fishtailed. Tires screamed. The entire airframe shuddered as if it might break apart at the seams. Naomi fought the stick with every muscle in her body, jaw clenched, refusing to let go. And then miraculously the beast straightened. It skidded, slowed, staggered, and finally lurched to a stop. Engines coughed smoke. Silence fell, broken only by the tick of cooling metal. Ward moved first. He sprinted forward, climbed halfway up the ladder, and peered through the canopy. Naomi's face was pale, streaked with sweat, but her grip still locked on the stick. Ward gave a rough nod, voice shaking with relief. "Welcome home, Hog." Naomi let out the breath she hadn't known she was holding. Her trembling hands slipped from the controls. Slowly she lifted her helmet, setting it in her lap. Cool night air rushed in through a crack in the canopy, mixing with the bitter scent of scorched paint and jet fuel. Around her, Ward's crew erupted cheers, claps, even exhausted sobs. Some slumped to the ground, too drained to stand, but all knew what they had just witnessed. Against orders, against reason, against every odd, the forgotten pilot had brought her Hog back alive. Naomi leaned her forehead against the glass, eyes burning. No words came, only gratitude for the machine that had carried her, for the crew who had lit the way, for the men in the valley who still breathed because she refused to quit. The war wasn't over. The politics weren't over. The general's fury would come with the dawn. But none of that mattered here, because on this crooked road lit by borrowed light, one truth outshone every order ever given: Naomi was home. And the Hog still lived. The cockpit finally fell silent. Naomi's hands slipped from the stick, slick with sweat, trembling, as if they no longer belonged to her. She pulled off her helmet and set it aside. For the first time all night, the cool night air kissed her face. Tears welled, uninvited, unstoppable, carving tracks through soot and smoke. She had survived. The Hog had survived. And because of that, Echo Team had survived. In the valley, Ramirez's men gathered themselves, mud-streaked, bone-weary, but alive. Dawson leaned against the broken wall of the farmhouse, staring upward at the faint silhouette of the Hog, still circling its wounded wing, dragging yet steady. His voice cracked into the night. "Legends never die." The words spread quietly among the team, half in disbelief, half in reverence. She had been a rumor, a ghost, a name buried in silence. Tonight she was steel flesh and defiance. Naomi wiped her face with a shaking glove. She knew what awaited her: tribunals and accusations. The general's fury sharpened into punishment. But at that moment, none of it mattered. What mattered were the living, the men who would go home, who would still call their children, still hold their spouses, still wake to another dawn. And that truth was the real elixir. It wasn't about glory, not medals, not reports, not victory parades. It was about loyalty, about honor, about comradeship that outlives bureaucracy, about a promise kept even when the cost is exile. For the seniors watching, the message cut deeper. Even if the world forgets your name, even if time erases your record, your value endures in the lives you touched, in the moments you stood when no one else would. A quiet voiceover seemed to rise with the night: "Bring them home." For some, it's just a slogan. For those who wore the uniform, it is a vow. Across America's history, too many have been asked to give everything only to be erased when the war ended. The Tuskegee Airmen, who flew with brilliance yet returned to segregation. The women Air Force service pilots who ferried bombers, trained crews but waited decades for recognition. The Vietnam veterans who stepped off the plane to silence instead of gratitude. Forgotten by policy, but never forgotten by the ones whose lives they saved. Tonight, Naomi Carter joined their company not by decree of generals, but by the undeniable truth of survival. She brought them home when command would not. She carried the weight of the forgotten and turned it into fire that broke an enemy line. The hog ticked as it cooled the sound like the slow heartbeat of an old clock. Naomi sat in its battered heart, weary, broken, but victorious in the only way that mattered. And in that silence, her tears were not of sorrow, but of something older, purer dignity reclaimed. The battlefield was silent at last. Smoke drifted away, and the valley, once a graveyard of hope, now carried the sound of men breathing. Alive because one woman refused to be erased. The general may have scrubbed her name from the record, but those she saved that night never will. And neither, perhaps, will we. Because legends do not need permission to exist. They live in the heartbeat of families who still had someone to hug, in the whispered truth passed between soldiers she came when no one else would. Naomi Carter's story is not hers alone. It belongs to every veteran pushed into silence, every sacrifice unrecognized, every act of loyalty buried by bureaucracy. Tonight her name rises with theirs, and now it belongs to us. By remembering, by speaking, by carrying her courage forward, we make sure the world never forgets. If this story touched your heart, please like and share, so others may feel it too. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to know your voice, your place, your memory. And subscribe to hear more stories of warriors the world tried to forget, because together we keep them alive.